In October 1994, 3 film students walked into the Maryland woods with cameras and curiosity. They were never seen alive again. 1 year later, their footage was found buried beneath an abandoned house. What was on those tapes would change horror cinema forever and blur the line between myth and reality so completely that millions of people worldwide believed they had witnessed actual evidence of the supernatural. But the real story, it's somehow even more disturbing than you think. This is the complete, unfiltered truth about the Blair Witch Project, the legend, the lies, and the psychological terror that made it the most profitable independent film ever made.
Before we dive into what really happened, you need to understand the mythology that was created. Because this wasn't just a movie, this was an elaborate, meticulously crafted deception that fooled an entire generation. The story begins in 1785 in the fictional town of Blair, Maryland. An elderly woman named Elly Kedward lived on the outskirts of the settlement, keeping to herself in a modest cabin at the forest's edge. The townspeople regarded her with suspicion, as they did with most women who lived alone. Then, in the brutal winter of that year, several children from the town came forward with a horrifying accusation. They claimed Elly Kedward had lured them into her home under various pretenses. Once inside, she would restrain them and draw blood from their bodies for unknown, presumably dark purposes. The children showed marks. The parents were outraged. In an era where witch hysteria could ignite like wildfire, there was no lengthy trial, no benefit of the doubt. Elly Kedward was found guilty of witchcraft. Her punishment? She was tied to a wooden cart, dragged deep into the frozen woods during one of the harshest winters on record, and abandoned, left to die of exposure, starvation, or whatever predators might find her first. The townspeople returned to Blair, convinced they had solved their problem. They were catastrophically wrong. Within months, the nightmare began. Children started disappearing. Not 1 or 2, but half the town's youth vanished without a single trace. No bodies were found, no evidence of where they had gone, and every single person who had accused Elly Kedward, who had testified against her, who had dragged her into those woods, they disappeared too, completely, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The remaining residents of Blair were gripped by absolute terror. They believed they were cursed, that Elly Kedward had made a pact with something dark in those woods, something that was now exacting revenge. In their panic, they made a desperate decision. They abandoned Blair entirely. Every home, every building left to rot. And they made a solemn vow, never speak the name Elly Kedward again, never acknowledge what they had done. Perhaps, they thought, if they forgot her, she would forget them. The town of Blair was erased from maps. For decades, that land sat empty, the ruins slowly consumed by the forest. But curses, as the story goes, don't simply fade away. In 1824, a new settlement was established on the same cursed ground. They called it Burkittsville. The new residents had no knowledge of what had transpired there, no idea they were building their homes on land soaked in tragedy and supernatural vengeance. For a few years, life was peaceful. Then the incidents began. In 1825, a young girl named Eileen Treacle was playing near Tappy East Creek with several other children. Witnesses reported that she suddenly screamed and began thrashing in the shallow water. Before anyone could reach her, she was pulled under by what multiple witnesses described as a pale white hand emerging from the creek bed. Her body was never recovered. But the horror didn't end there. For 13 days following her disappearance, Tappy East Creek became clogged with strange objects. Bundles of sticks, carefully tied together with what appeared to be human hair, floated to the surface by the dozens. The water itself turned oily and foul. No one could explain it. The stick bundles would become a recurring omen, a signature of whatever evil inhabited those woods.
Fast forward to November 1886. An 8-year-old girl named Robin Weaver went missing while playing in the woods near her home. A massive search party was organized, with virtually every able-bodied man in Burkittsville joining the effort. They split into groups and ventured deep into the Black Hills forest. Robin returned on her own 3 days later, dehydrated and terrified, but physically unharmed. The story she told chilled everyone who heard it. She claimed she had followed a strange old woman through the woods. This woman, Robin insisted, was floating. Her feet never touched the ground. The apparition led her to an abandoned house deep in the forest, but Robin got scared and ran. She wandered for days before finding her way home. The town was relieved to have Robin back, but one of the search parties, a group of 5 men, had not returned. Another search was launched. What they found became the stuff of nightmares that would haunt Burkittsville for generations. The 5 men were discovered in a clearing deep in the forest. All were dead. All had been disemboweled, their organs removed with what appeared to be ritualistic precision. But the most disturbing detail was the arrangement of their bodies. They had been tied together at the hands and feet and positioned to form a perfect 5-pointed star, a pentagram. Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. No one was ever charged. No explanation was ever found. The official report vaguely mentioned animal attack, but everyone knew that was impossible. No animal arranges bodies in geometric patterns. The whispers began again. The Blair Witch had returned. The most infamous and disturbing chapter of the Blair Witch legend takes place in the 1940s, and this is where the mythology becomes almost unbearably dark. Rustin Parr was a hermit who lived in an isolated cabin deep in the Black Hills forest. He rarely came to town, kept no friends, and lived a solitary existence that made him the subject of local gossip and suspicion. Then, on November 25, 1941, he walked into a local market in Burkittsville, approached the owner with an eerily calm demeanor, and spoke 7 words that would become legendary in horror lore. "I'm finally finished."
The market owner, confused, asked what he meant. Rustin Parr simply repeated himself and asked the owner to contact the police. When authorities arrived at Parr's cabin, they discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. In his basement were the bodies of 7 children who had gone missing from the Burkittsville area over the previous 8 months. The children had been murdered in a specific ritualistic manner. Each had been killed individually, while another child was forced to watch. But here's the detail that will haunt you. Parr would make one child stand in the corner facing the wall while he murdered the other child behind them. Why? According to Parr's confession, it was because she told him to. The old woman ghost who lived in the woods, the Blair Witch. Rustin Parr confessed to everything. He showed no remorse, only insisting repeatedly that he was following instructions by a supernatural entity that had been tormenting him for years. He claimed she would whisper to him at night, that she appeared in his dreams, that she promised the torment would only end when he completed her tasks. He was convicted and hanged for his crimes in 1941. But in his final words before execution, he maintained his story. He was not acting alone. Something in those woods had commanded him, something ancient and evil that was still there, waiting. This brings us to October 1994. 3 young film students from Montgomery College, Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams, decided to create a documentary about the Blair Witch legend for a class project. They were skeptical, intrigued by the local folklore, but not believers in the supernatural. They saw it as a fascinating piece of regional mythology, perfect for an anthropological documentary. They spent weeks researching, conducting interviews with Burkittsville residents. Some locals shared stories passed down through their families, tales of strange sounds in the woods, sightings of an old woman near the creek, children's laughter echoing from empty forests. Others dismissed it entirely as nonsense, superstitious stories told to scare children into staying close to home. Armed with a 16mm film camera and a Hi-8 video camera, along with enough supplies for a few days, the 3 students hiked into the Black Hills Forest on October 20, 1994. Their plan was simple: film the locations associated with the legend, capture some atmospheric footage of the forest, and return home with enough material for their documentary. They never came back. When they didn't return after several days, their families contacted authorities. A massive search was launched. Helicopters scoured the forest. Search dogs were deployed. Volunteers combed through miles of woods. No trace of the students was found. No abandoned equipment, no clothing, no bodies. It was as if the forest had swallowed them completely. The case went cold. The families held memorial services without bodies to bury. The story became a tragic local incident. 3 young people lost to the wilderness, probably victims of the elements or a tragic accident. Then, in October 1995, exactly 1 year after their disappearance, a group of students exploring the ruins of an old house in the Black Hills Forest made a discovery that would change everything.
Buried beneath the foundation of the abandoned house, the same house that matched Robin Weaver's description from 1886, they found a duffel bag. Inside were film canisters and video cassettes. When developed and reviewed, authorities realized they were looking at the final days of Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams. What was on those tapes would become the Blair Witch Project. The footage is raw, unedited, and absolutely terrifying in its authenticity. We see the three students joking and laughing as they begin their hike. They interview locals, they film the cemetery, they venture deeper into the forest with confidence and excitement. Then things begin to deteriorate. They realize they're lost. The map disappears under mysterious circumstances. We see them searching frantically for it, accusing each other. They start walking in circles, recognizing the same landmarks despite being certain they're heading in new directions. The forest seems to be actively disorienting them, trapping them. At night, the true horror begins. They hear sounds outside their tent, not animal sounds, cackling laughter, children's voices whispering and giggling in the darkness, footsteps circling their campsite, the sounds of sticks breaking, as if something or multiple somethings are walking around them, just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. In the morning, they find the stick figures, crude, human-shaped bundles of sticks tied together with organic material hanging from trees around their campsite. Then the rock piles appear, carefully stacked stones placed outside their tent while they slept, arranged in patterns they can't understand but instinctively fear. The psychological deterioration is brutal to watch. These three friends turn on each other. Accusations fly. Heather becomes increasingly desperate, insisting they keep filming, that documenting everything is their only hope. Josh grows angry and confrontational. Mike becomes withdrawn and terrified. The fear is palpable, real, human. The final sequence is one of the most iconic and terrifying endings in horror cinema history. They hear Josh's voice screaming in the distance, even though Josh has been missing since the previous night. Following the screams, Mike and Heather discover the abandoned house. Against every instinct, they enter. The house is a nightmare. Decaying walls covered in child-sized handprints, strange symbols carved into the rotting wood. And in the basement, illuminated by their dying flashlight, they find Mike standing in the corner, facing the wall, exactly as Rustin Parr forced his victims to do decades earlier. Heather screams Mike's name. There's a sound of impact. Heather's camera drops to the floor, the image going chaotic. We hear her screaming. Then silence. The footage ends.
Now here's where this story transforms from a simple horror film into a cultural phenomenon that redefined viral marketing. Directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez didn't just make a movie, they created an alternate reality. A transmedia experience that exploited the internet's potential in ways no one had attempted before. Remember, this was 1999. The internet was still relatively new. Information couldn't be instantly verified like today, and people were far more trusting of what they read online. The filmmakers created BlairWitch.com months before the film's release. The website presented itself as a serious investigative resource about the missing students. It featured fake police reports with official-looking seals and signatures, fabricated news clippings about the disappearances, interviews with family members, actors desperately seeking information about their missing children, crime scene photos, detailed historical documents about the Blair Witch legend, presented as authentic historical research. They took it further. IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, listed Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams as missing, presumed deceased. Film festival screenings presented the footage as a documentary, not a narrative film. They distributed missing persons flyers on college campuses across the country, asking students if they had any information about the three filmmakers. The result was mass confusion and belief. Thousands, perhaps millions of people genuinely believed they were watching real footage of three people's final days. The debate raged across early internet forums, chat rooms, and message boards. Was this real? Did three students actually die in those woods? Was the Blair Witch real? The ambiguity was intentional and brilliant. The filmmakers never outright claimed it was real footage, but they never definitively said it was fiction either. They danced on that line perfectly, allowing the mystery to grow organically. So, let's be absolutely, unequivocally clear about what's real and what's fiction. The Blair Witch is not real. Elly Kedward never existed. The town of Blair never existed. Rustin Parr never existed. The entire mythology was created by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez specifically for this film. There is zero historical basis for any of it in Maryland folklore. Burkittsville is a real town, but it has no connection to witch legends. The residents were absolutely not thrilled when their quiet community was suddenly invaded by thousands of horror fans searching for witch evidence and, unfortunately, vandalizing their historic cemetery. Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams are actors who are very much alive. They improvised most of their dialogue based on scenarios the directors created, lending the footage its unsettling authenticity. The found footage was created using the actual cameras the characters carry in the film, but it was carefully planned and directed. However, the directors did employ psychological tactics to enhance the actors' fear. They were given less food than promised. They were genuinely lost at times, with crew monitoring from a distance. They were harassed at night with strange sounds and interventions they weren't always aware of. The fear and exhaustion you see is, in some ways, real. The Blair Witch Project was made for approximately $60,000. It went on to gross nearly $250 million worldwide, making it one of the most profitable films ever made relative to budget. More importantly, it single-handedly popularized the found footage genre that would dominate horror for the next 2 decades. Films like Paranormal Activity, REC, Cloverfield, and countless others owe their existence to Blair Witch's success.
It proved that horror doesn't need monsters you can see. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is what you don't see, what your imagination creates in the darkness. The stick figures, the rock piles, the sounds in the night. None of these things are inherently scary, but in context, with mounting dread and isolation, they become absolutely terrifying. The film also demonstrated the immense power of viral marketing before viral marketing was even a common term. It showed that audience immersion and participation could be just as important as the film itself.
Even after the truth was revealed, even after the actors appeared on talk shows very much alive, the legend of the Blair Witch persisted. Why? Because it feels real. The improvised dialogue doesn't sound like a script. The fear in the actors' eyes is genuine. The forest is an actual place you can visit. The legend, while fictional, is constructed from real folklore archetypes that resonate with our deepest fears. It taps into primal terror, being lost in wilderness, the fear of the dark, the unknown lurking just beyond our perception. It's a modern campfire story that took on a life of its own, becoming a piece of digital folklore. The Blair Witch Project reminds us that the most effective horror lives not on screen, but in our minds. The monsters we imagine are always more terrifying than anything special effects can create. And sometimes the best lies are the ones we want to believe. The legacy of the Blair Witch Project isn't just about a successful horror film. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, to humanity's endless fascination with the supernatural, and to our willingness, our desire to believe in something beyond rational explanation. Those woods in Maryland are just woods. There is no witch. There were no murdered students. But for millions of people, the legend feels more real than reality itself. And maybe that's the real magic and the real horror of this story. The Blair Witch may not be real, but she exists nonetheless, living in our collective imagination, waiting in the dark corners of our minds where fear and belief intertwine. What do you think? Did you believe it was real when you first saw it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of horror's greatest deceptions, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content exploring the terrifying, the mysterious, and the unexplained. Thanks for watching, and remember, some legends are too powerful to die, even when we know they were never alive.